Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of the Arbury Road podcast. I am joined today by member of the Maltese Labour Party and member of the European Parliament, Agius Saliba. Alex, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks to you and thanks for your invite.
My pleasure. So let's dive right in. We are here today to talk about the right to disconnect. So this was a bill that you recently got pushed through the European Parliament. I was wondering, can you just tell us a bit about this, exactly what the right to disconnect is and how the debate went in the Parliament?
Yes, first of all, what is the right to disconnect? I think each and every one of us has had the experience whereby he's enjoying his family or loved ones during a weekend after working hours, and you receive a SMS, a WhatsApp message, an email, a telephone call, and you feel obliged to reply. You feel obliged to reply because ultimately today we are living in a world which is so much affected by digital technologies. And I have nothing against, and we have nothing against digital technologies and the use of digital technologies, because ultimately, if it wasn't for these technologies, we would have ended up in a situation where thousands and thousands of European workers during the pandemic restrictions would have lost their jobs. So digital technologies helped us to continue going on with our lives as normal as possible, including our work. But at the same time, we are now going into the direction of blurring more the line between working time and rest time. So each and every one of us went through this situation, and at EU level we have fundamental legislation such as occupational health and safety legislation, such as the Working Time Directive, such as the work-life balance. But on the other hand, we don't have the right to disconnect, which is defined, and we are not giving basically the tools for our workers to be able to enforce their right to disconnect. Therefore, for the first time, we are moving not only a recommendation, but we are moving a fully developed piece of legislation, a directive, which is defining this right, which is giving minimum rights, which are then negotiated by social partners at member state and employment undertaking level, because it's impossible to implement a one-size-fits-all solution for the right to disconnect with so many different employment modalities and different sectors and also different systems at member state level. So we are giving a lot of power to social partners to be able to implement this right. But upon these fundamental requirements, minimum requirements, such as recording of working time and giving the information to employees, such as defining when and the right to connect and disconnect in each workplace, such as defining also restrictively the derogations, which can be used only in exceptional circumstances. And in the case of derogations, we are making it clear that there should be full compensation. And apart from full compensation, there should be an impact assessment on the physical and mental health of our workers. And we are also giving the tools, as I said, for employees to be able to enforce this right by ADR, by also giving also the opportunity for collective redress for unions to be able to represent their employees, and also introducing the concept of reversal of burden of proof in case of prima facie discrimination, when an employee would use the right to disconnect and basically face victimization, face losing his job, face a situation whereby he is losing the opportunity to be promoted at his workplace. Therefore, there we are giving, we are saying that it should be the employer and not the employee who should justify that discrimination, victimization was not carried out because the employee has exercised his fundamental right to disconnect. So I think that these are important milestones that we have reached when it comes to not only having the right to disconnect as a principle, which everyone is agreeing that the right to disconnect is there, should be there, and should be implemented. But at the same time, I think that the biggest stumbling blocks that we found both during our negotiations, pre having the vote in the ample committee and also before having the vote last week in the plenary of the European Parliament. The biggest issue is, and this was our biggest battle during the past year, was to have a fully fledged directive, which is and was now approved by the European Parliament, so that this would not end up to be a right which is only good to be written down on paper, but ultimately a right that could be easily enforced, and also balancing the rights of both the employers and also the employees.
Okay, brilliant. That's really interesting to get some further insight into the right, because I think a lot of us were aware that this discussion was going on, but you've touched on some of the issues that I wanted to ask you about, which were, first of all, I think the reversal of the burden of proof is an extremely important element to have in the piece of legislation. It's also, as you said, it's very important that it's enforceable across member states, you know, as opposed to just being soft law, let's say, which should be applied but doesn't really get applied. Now, you've touched on the biggest issue was getting it to be a properly enforceable directive. What kind of groups were giving you pushback on this in the Parliament?
I think that this was from the very beginning. From the very beginning, we came from a situation whereby we were in total minority. So both before the ample vote and also before the plenary vote, there were a lot of divisions between different political groups, a lot of lobbying which has been carried out, especially by Business Europe, who also sent a letter to all MEPs to reject this vote. They have contacted their members at member state level to lobby directly with their national MEPs to vote down the whole report. So there was a lot of pressure on MEPs and a lot of pressure on particular political groups. ECR and ID were always against. Renew ended up being divided. It was united in favor of the report at ample. In the ample committee, there were only, if I'm not mistaken, 2 abstentions from Renew group, but ultimately in the final vote there were around 40 Renew MEPs who voted against the right to disconnect. EPP were first of all during the negotiations against having a directive, but and since it was really important, and they abstained in the ample vote, except for 2 MEPs. But ultimately, we worked hard on EPP because it was impossible for us to get this report approved, because it needed a qualified majority and not simple majority, because this was a legislative initiative. So for us, it was crucial. And if you make some calculations, if we deduct the EPP members which voted with us, the report would have never been approved, although it was approved by a big majority, 472 members from 681, if I'm not mistaken, is a very good number. Yeah. But again, discussions were really tough, really hard. But ultimately, I think that the European Parliament has sent a very clear, a very strong message that basically this democratic institution has not turned its back on our employees during such a difficult time for us, for all workers throughout Europe. This was a big victory for all employees, millions of employees throughout Europe.
And do you see, so the COVID-19, the situation we've been in for the last year, do you think that played a big role in this bill getting passed?
Yes, it did too. So first of all, the starting point for the discussion of the right to disconnect was pre-pandemic. Mm-hmm. So basically, the discussion in ample was, and I was pushing from day one when I was elected here in the European Parliament, to have it as a priority, both for my political family, for the S&D group, but also to be picked up as a priority file for the ample committee. We succeeded in that. But again, the INI report was approved last January, so a year ago. It was weeks before the pandemic hit us. So the problems of this ever-connectedness, this digital obesity, was already there pre-pandemic. But what is the situation today? The situation today is that we are having, in some member states, 40% of their workforce working from home. And this shift, for example, I had a number of discussions with some employers in my member state. The pandemic was a good test case for them, for employers, to test the waters and see if they can trust their employees to work from home. And in many instances, this has worked perfectly well. We have reduced commuting times. Employers have also reduced some of their costs from office work. And I believe that employees are also more productive when they work from home and when they are giving this level of flexibility. So the shift will continue to be there. But again, then there are a number of pitfalls for this. And if you look at a very important statistic, a report moved forward by Eurofound a couple of months ago, you see that around 30% of employees who are working from home, teleworking, are saying that they are working during their rest periods. On the other hand, it's only 5% of employees who are office workers, traditional office workers, who are saying that they work during their rest period. So the problem is there.
Yeah.
The problem is more visible today than it was pre-pandemic. So it's really important, and it's high time to act as soon as possible to give this right to all workers throughout Europe. This is a fundamental right. It should be enjoyed without distinction, without limitation, to all employees who have contact with digital technologies.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think on this topic in particular, this could be one of the positive notes that comes out of the pandemic, you know, being able to maybe accelerate this idea, get it through the parliament, and get another fundamental right, as you say, assigned to all citizens. So moving on then, how do you see this impacting self-employed workers? Because many self-employed workers I speak to feel as if they have to be ready 24/7. How does this right impact them in their lives and their profession?
We have also made it clear that when it comes to bogus self-employment, especially that sector, which for us, it's one of the most vulnerable sectors when it comes in our workforce, the right to disconnect should also be applicable to them. When it comes to purely and legal self-employment, I think that there is more control on behalf of the self-employed person to basically control himself, control his right to disconnect. So there, I think it will be a bit more difficult to make legislation that will control the self-employed person himself. So I don't think that, I think that the level of flexibility of self-employed workers should be protected. And in their case, it's not a situation whereby they are put in a situation that they have to remain connected. It's a situation whereby they can regulate themselves. But when there is this bogus self-employment, when employers try to cover and take shelter from protecting their employees with fundamental rights, which are there and that they should enjoy, and they label them as self-employed, which is not the case, then even there, the right to disconnect should be applicable so that there are no loopholes which are left, which ultimately will leave workers unprotected.
Okay, brilliant. Do you have an example of these bogus self-employed people, as you say?
There are a lot of examples of bogus self-employment. I can recall, for example, situations and the number of bogus self-employment in my eyes, which is happening with platform workers who are being labeled as being self-employed, but in fact, they are being totally employed and totally under the supervision and under the orders of their employer when they are undertaking their work. So for me, even those employees should also be offered protection.
Okay, perfect. So following on from that, a lot of people have seen this, the right to disconnect, as a step towards a 4-day working week, which is an ongoing discussion in many European countries. Do you see that this necessarily as a next step, as a logical next step?
So I think that we have to distinguish between the two concepts, the right to disconnect and the 4-day week proposal idea. I have nothing against the 4-day week discussion and also the implementation, which has already been done in some member states, especially Scandinavian member states. And statistics are showing and studies are showing that a 4-day week can make our employees to become more productive and also strengthen work-life balance, flexibility, and do away with a number of problems that workers are facing. So I have nothing against the 4-day week. And if you ask me personally, I would tend to be in favor of having a 4-day week, because I totally believe that productivity is not directly linked with the number of hours that the employee is employed, staying at the office, working from home, but it's linked more to having the employee who is comfortable in his workplace, who is ultimately, if you are comfortable, if your mental and physical health are good, can perform better. And this is also the biggest problem of this ever connectedness, that there is the idea of working 24/7 because you end up being more productive. And I totally believe that being ever connected will make you less productive, and because if you have a situation whereby the mental and physical health of the employees is not good, they won't be productive. And this is, I think, something which should be clear to us. But again, I am in total agreement when it comes to trying to implement this 4-day week throughout the union. But I think that these are two initiatives which are separate from each other, and one is not leading to the other. When it comes to the right to disconnect, it is tantamount to a situation whereby fundamental rights which are enshrined in the Working Time Directive, daily and weekly rest periods, ultimately they are protected in the digital revolution that we are ultimately living with today.
Okay, perfect. Another quick question that's just come to mind regarding workers' rights and the pandemic in particular is that we've seen a massive increase in, services like delivery people, your Deliveroos, your Uber Eats, whoever they may be. How can countries and governments protect these workers who are caught in a very vulnerable situation where they're, as you say, they're not protected by their employer? They're out working every night. They're some of the only people working during full lockdowns, and they're maybe not completely, but they're extremely underprotected.
As I said, Dermot, for me, that is bogus self-employment. This is the reality of the situation. We have workers out there who are not being given minimum, not level of protection, but minimum, the minimum level of protection, sick leave, rest periods, nothing at all, because they are being labeled as platform workers. So it's really important for us, both at national and at member state level and at EU level, that we move forward legislation to protect these workers, because this is not self-employment. This is breaking up fundamental rights of these workers, and this should stop as soon as possible, and this should be a priority of our union.
Perfect. Is there legislation currently being discussed at the European level on this?
On this, there are a lot of initiatives and a lot of push, especially a big push from my political family, from the S&D family, to go in that direction and to have a non-initiative report or a legislation as soon as possible to protect these workers. But we are not discussing a legislation per se as we speak when it comes to full protection of these platform workers.
Okay, perfect. So moving a bit away from specifically now from workers' rights, and we'd love to get a bit of an insight about what's going on at the European level, at the European Parliament. As you know, we're a progressive organization, and from what I've seen and what I've read, you share a lot of these progressive values that we share at Arbury Road. Do you feel there's a sense of progressivism at the European level amongst the other members of parliament and the other bodies?
If you look at the composition of the political groups, I think that the hurdles today compared with the previous legislature are much more prominent and much more difficult. So this is reflective in the discussions that, for example, I have undertook as lead MEP during the past months, both in the right to disconnect and also in the Digital Services Act, which is rather a major piece of legislation of fundamental importance in this legislature. So I think that the struggle for progressivism is more difficult today than it was yesterday, even internally with the distribution of MEPs in the different political groups. So the hurdles are there, but I always believe that if we stay united as the left spectrum of the political groups, I think that we can make very important inroads, because ultimately a number of priorities and key files for us make total sense.
Yeah.
They are making total sense in the realities and the difficulties that our citizens are facing, that our citizens are living. So I think that staying united is key in pushing forward our progressive agenda. And as we have seen also in this report, in the right to disconnect, if you manage to convince, if you manage to stay united, you can also move forward, even when starting with a very big minus, with a very big minority. In the beginning of the discussions, you can also achieve good results, positive results for our progressive agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though it's unfortunate to hear that you feel maybe the progressive element at the European level has taken a step back, it is encouraging to hear that you bring forward a piece of legislation like this, which is, as you say, a fundamental right for everyone. It starts out being ignored with a tiny minority in favor, and it ends up getting passed. So there certainly is, I can certainly take some hope from that, at least.
Yes.
So last question I have for you, and this is more of a personal one. Can you tell us a bit about your experience leading a student organization?
Yes, I started my let's put it like that, political career as Secretary General of the Social Democrats student organization in Malta, and that was a very big learning curve for me. We started up in a situation whereby maybe a strange situation when compared with other member states, but when it came to our secondary educational institutions and also university, progressivism and social democracy was not that trendy and that catchy during the years that I was active in student organizations. But again, we moved forward a lot of different initiatives, a lot of different campaigns, from campaigning for the introduction, for example, of divorce legislation in Malta, which again was unheard of, and succeeding to make a lot of inroads with students who took the forefront during the campaign, to other maybe not so big issues, but important issues, progressive issues. So again, this was a big learning curve for me. It started my activism also, because some years later I then joined the youth movement of the Labour Party in Malta, the Social Democratic Party in Malta. So it was a very important milestone for me to start addressing some of the most important issues for us as a progressive family.
Yeah, I think it's really important to motivate young people who show an interest in politics, because the interest tends to waver. I know at the moment there are a lot more younger people getting more involved, And we really want to encourage that. We want to be involved with young people as much as possible when it comes to politics, and we really want to be able to motivate them to get involved. Do you have any tips regarding that? How did you motivate your fellow students to get involved and push these policies?
I think that the best suggestion that I can give is to make them feel that they are involved, make them feel that they are at the center of things, and not just using youths, students just as a backdrop for an initiative, for a campaign. If you give them a voice, if you give them a space, if you give them a role, and then they feel that they are an important block within the system, and not just using them because it's cool to use youths, but giving them a platform to vouch their concerns, and also be challenges in ideas, and in trying to break taboos and break up traditional concepts. I think that they will be more inclined to get involved, participate more, and bring the required change. I think youths, when you give them a challenge, when you give them a target to reach, to change things for the better, they will take it and they will do a very good job with that.
Okay, fantastic. Alex Agius Saliba, MEP, thank you so much for coming and giving us.
Thanks, Dermot, to you,
an absolute
and all the best for Arbury Road.
Thank you very much.